Um, the biggest thing right now is the number of coronavirus cases. U.S. has become the hotspot now, and the number of cases continue to go higher. A lot of theories around like how high can they go, but my biggest thing is you really have to question what is how long will this lockdown or shutdown last? That is the biggest question that you have to ask. Um, have we reached peak yet? If we reach peak, assuming we reach peak today, I have a very strong feeling we're going to wait another 15 days for things to go back to normal. Um, and when they go back to normal, will they be normal as we were, let's say, in February, or will it be worse? Like you have to understand this is a crisis that nobody knew about it. Nobody knows how this is going to play out and how you're going to like how things will play out. Like right now, the amount of unemployment is soaring, not just in Canada, in the US as well. People have been laid off from work. And it's just and like we had a great run over the past 10 years, and one would assume that companies and individuals saved money and they were in a good financial state, but it's starting to become very clear that people weren't. So there's so many things happening that you can't say, oh, this is over. Like the number of coronavirus cases is just the beginning. You have to understand that there is going to be implications down the road. What's going to happen to people who had a lot of debt? What's going to happen to people who had savings and they lost a lot of money in the stock market or whatever it is? Like there's so many implications. We just don't know the scope of it. I've been talking about in my five things on the daily basis pretty much is that you have to understand this is a storm. I don't think we have hit the eye of the storm yet. So we don't really know what the damage really is. Until we reach the eye of the storm, then we can look and try to figure out what kind of damage there is right now. Um, I've been, like we go out and like drive around just for like some fresh air, and the roads are empty. The stores are empty. Well, a lot of stores are closed. The only thing that's open is grocery stores. What's going to happen to nail salons? What's going to happen to barbershops? What's going to happen to, restaurants who have invested millions of dollars to, or hundreds of thousands of dollars to run the operations, and now they don't have any money coming in, but they have employees. Yeah, they may have laid off the employee. What's going to happen to the employees? What's going to happen to the landlord where the restaurant is, where the restaurant leases the place, or a bunch of things that go around, and it's not. I was talking to someone recently, and they were talking about like, oh, it's going to be a banking crisis, or it's going to be that, or whatever. You have to the problem right now is nobody can really pinpoint where the crisis is going to happen. Is it going to be the housing market? Like last, for example, in 2008, 2009, you knew it was the housing market that created a lot of trouble. It wasn't just, it wasn't something else. It was housing market, banks making stupid bets and running, and then, unemployment going higher and the economy going the wrong way. So everything came in together, but housing market was the trigger. What is the trigger here? The coronavirus was a catalyst to something. Now now we have to ask who is going to be the who's going to get hurt, or what's going to happen. Will it be housing? Will it be the small businesses? Will it be the big corporations? Will it be the banks? There's so many variables right now that I personally can't pinpoint anything. So that's why I keep saying you got to be cautious. You can't just on the daily basis. I've been getting a lot of people going like, how can you say things are not well, or how are you so bearish when the stock market has soared, the Dow has soared 3,000 points or whatever. It's just like it doesn't. I can't. My outlook is very foggy. I can't come out with confidence and say that everything is great when it's not. If anyone you talk to, yes, in the short term things may be getting better in New York or in Italy or whatever it is, but in the long run, like the things are breaking. Or at least I feel that things are breaking, and that's where you really have to be careful. Don't take it lightly. I feel like a lot of people are taking it lightly, and they think that we'll be back to normal by summer. Will we really be back to normal by summer? I don't think so. I think people have a very hard time going out, even when we hit the peak. What do you call it? Even when we hit peak uncertainty, even when we hit the peak coronavirus numbers, and the number of cases are declining and number of deaths is declining, I think people will have a really hard time going out. Will you go out and shop? Will you go out to travel? Will you take cruise to somewhere? It's going to be a very long time before things get back to normal. Predicting Alpha, you guys stay on the line. I'm going to get you on. These guys are doing some great work with options. I'll get them on if you have time. I'm trying to limit to 1 hour. But if we run later, I'll let you guys know. Stay here. But let me go through the questions that I've gotten. I asked before. And everyone sent out. So I will go through them one by one. If I've missed anything, or if you have any questions as I speak, please put them here, and I'll try to answer as much as I can. So one of the most recent question I got was there are guys like Robert Kiyosaki. They're coming out and saying that the US dollar will completely collapse, and you should start buying gold, silver, and Bitcoin. So over the long term, the fundamentals of US dollars, in my opinion, are tormented. Any country who could do things like what US is doing, their currency wouldn't be around. But the thing that keeps US dollar going is the confidence in it. And one of the things about US dollar is that majority of the commodities and trade around the world are priced in the US dollar. So for US dollar to actually collapse like in a blink of an eye would be devastating. And if that happens, we actually will have a lot of issues. I can't even fathom the idea of US dollar going away at the moment right now. US dollar disappearing in an instant. I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think that this is a long-term play, and we're talking like 25 to 30 years. And this sounds crazy. 25 to 30 years, we're going to see gradual decline in the US dollar. And then what happens is you get to a point where other currencies, I don't know what currency, I would like to assume that Chinese yuan is something worth looking. The other currencies become strong enough to take over. And then you start to see a bunch of things happening not in the US dollar. And that's when, things escalate in the US dollar. You see a sell-off, collapse, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think in the short term anything is happening, but let me talk a little bit. I have another question, so let me just add to that. So over the past few weeks, I've been talking about, there is a US dollar shortage, or we have a US dollar shortage happening. And I actually got a question saying, what is this US dollar shortage you keep talking about? So what's happening is there is a US dollar shortage. Whenever there's a crisis in the world, people actually rush to US dollars. Why? Because it's considered a safe haven. And at the same time, a lot of business, a lot of debt payments, and a lot of things like that are actually done in the US dollar. So whenever there is a crisis, people tend to hoard it. And what ends up happening is you see a spike in the US dollar. I suggest you go and look at a chart of the US dollar, and then you'll get an idea that there was a spike, and it was a sign that, hey, there is some sort of shortage happening. There are so many US dollars out there. How could there be a shortage? So right now, Federal Reserve is printing like there is no tomorrow. And you have to understand what's happening is the Federal Reserve is printing, the money is going to the bank and is staying there. Central banks own a lot of US dollars. They are keeping that dollars with them. They're not throwing it in the market. They're not, the banks are not lending it. So what ends up happening is all of a sudden you get this vacuum where a lot of US dollar is needed to do the business or whatever it is, or investment purposes, and you don't get it. And when you don't get it, you see a spike in the US dollar. And that's what's happening in the short term. Will it remain for the long term? I mean, right now, the big central banks around the world are actually looking into providing liquidity. I believe the Bank of England, the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, and ECB, if I'm not mistaken, they're actually working together to make sure that there is no dollar shortages. But it still looks like that there could be something down the road. But again, that's my opinion. I could be wrong. Tomorrow, dollar goes down the drain, and things go crazy. We'll see. But I don't. And personally, I don't see a collapse-like scenario happening in an instant. But I do see over the very long term that it could happen. And in the short term, I'm watching the dollar shortage. There is a lot of dollar needed around the world, and there might be getting the dollar that's being printed by the Federal Reserve and bunch of like liquidity that's being provided by the central banks might be just getting sucked into the financial system, because banks are not really lending. If I'm not mistaken, right now I don't have the data on it, but I wouldn't be surprised if banks have literally stopped lending money, whatever it is, be it loans, mortgages, or anything like that, because I think they seem to be nervous about what is happening and what kind of default rates are going to happen down the road. So we'll see how that goes. Continuing on with banks lending, got a question saying, what do you think about Canadian banks? Are they still good? Canadian banks or the U.S. banks, I think they're in a similar boat at the moment. The Bank of Canada and Federal Reserve has made it very clear that they want to make sure that the banking system does not collapse. They've made it very clear. Federal Reserve came out and said, we're going to print unlimited money to make sure the financial system nothing happens to the financial system. Bank of Canada actually came out. Bank of Canada is doing quantitative easing. They didn't do quantitative easing back when the U.S. economy was in a financial crisis, back in 2008, 2009. They didn't really do quantitative easing. They just did a one-time payment to the banks just to make sure that they're in a good shape, and that's it. Even Bank of Canada is printing money and making sure that the financial system does not go down the drain. I think banks have some sort of an insurance policy or some sort of insurance from the central banks, but we don't know the real damage. Like, what kind of defaults are we going to see? Are we going to see homeowners defaulting? Are we going to see businesses defaulting? We don't know what kind of default rates are going to happen, but it will be interesting how they play out. In the short term, I believe if you really want to play the banks, what you would do is you would like, if there's a news about, let's say, Federal Reserve coming out and saying we're going to lower interest rates, or Bank of Canada comes out and says they're going to lower interest rates, you would buy on that news. Again, not a recommendation, just more of a observation. You'd buy on that news, and then you wait until there is, like, the rally slows down, and then you get out. And at the same time, you go in with very, very, very tight stops, and that's it. Like, I think banks are great trading opportunities right now, but a few weeks ago I liked them, and I thought it'd be a good idea to hold them for the long term. But I think my outlook on banks is kind of becoming bleak, just because I'm trying to figure out what kind of default rates they're going to see. If they see bigger defaults, we see their profit gets hit, and it's a long time before they can come back to profitability. Before I go into any other question, I see a question here. It says, "Are we going to hit recession?" I feel like we're hitting that side. Any idea? The government has announced so many benefits. I feel like this will bite us hard. Oh, okay. All right. So we are in a recession. I don't think anyone disagrees with that at this moment. We are going to, like, if we're not in recession now, we are going to be in recession within, like, by next quarter. Sorry, there within by next quarter. My biggest fear is that we are actually making a very strong case for a depression-like scenario. Depression is when you see a crazy amount of unemployment, crazy amount of decline in the economy, and just so much like I don't know how to like explain it in easier words than this. Like depression is when you just the economy is in a very very bad shape. The last time we had a depression was 1929, and I just hope that we don't see a scenario like that in the short term. The amount of unemployment there is actually scary, and I feel like the longer the closures go on, the bigger the unemployment is going to be, and that just has detrimental effect down the road. And the question also asked is like the government has announced so many benefits. I feel like this will bite us hard. I also had another question from another reader, and they said, sorry, it was around. So our debt to GDP is soaring. Are we digging ourselves for the long term? Personally, I think this is a money destruction event that we're seeing right now. Both central banks and the governments around the world are printing or making sure that they spend as much as they can. Central banks are making sure they print as much as they can. What that does is it destroys money in the long run. So yes, we are digging ourselves deeper every single time someone comes out and says we're going to print more or we're going to spend more. We are digging ourselves. Deeper. After we get out of this, I really hope we don't get an event like a hyperinflation of some sort where the inflation goes so high that we're not able to control it because there's so much money in the system and it has to go somewhere. Will banks continue to hoard it and like not give it to anybody? That would have more that would have even severe consequences, or banks will be forced to lend to people. So it'll be interesting how it all plays out, but I know, or I feel for I have a very strong feeling that this is a money destruction event, and we are going to, like, it'll be bad. It'll be bad in the long term. I've been talking about it for a bit now that we really need to look at real assets, and I'm talking gold, silver, housing, and real assets, whatever you think are real assets. Look into them. They are going to be great when this all ends because they will have value. Money might not have that much value. And I know I sound like a crazy person right now, and I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but the amount of money there is being made out of nowhere and the amount of spending that we're doing is going to be I don't know. Like it's just going to be it's going to be interesting times ahead. I see a question here is like, however, if large GDP and powerful countries are aiming for hyperinflation with globalization, this should even out in the long term. Again, we'll have to see how it plays out. Maybe central banks, because right now the expectation is that quarter one, quarter two, and quarter three of 2020 are going to be bad. But fourth quarter of 2020 is going to be good. So it's possible that what ends up happening is we go negative on rates by central banks in let's say next month or 2 months from now. We go negative. They print so much money, but then by the time we hit fourth quarter, they start to raise money and they start to some sort of they pull a move where they try to reduce the money supply that they have made available over this time. But again, it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But as of right now, given what the data I have or what I'm looking at, hyperinflation looks like a possible scenario in North America. I haven't done much research in Europe or Asia, but I am looking at those numbers now that I have some time on hand, and will obviously update as I learn more. Data in the U.S. and Canada is fairly easy to get. Sometimes in Europe and Asia, it's not the easiest to access the data. Um, did I have any other question here? What stocks should be looking at during this time? Any ideas? Um, when it comes to stocks, I think we have a very good or amazing trading market out there. If you're a trader, if you like to trade, look at anything that has high volume, big names. Um, there are going to be a lot of trading opportunities because the amount of swings we're seeing in the market is pretty impressive. So if you see a chart, you see a support and a resistance building up, what you do is you buy at the support and sell at the resistance, or sell at the resistance and buy at the support, and you make a decent trades. If you want to look at high volume places, right now I'm seeing high volume places in the big tech, airlines, and the banks. So, but there could be other places where there is high volume, but my focus has been on those few places. So I will look around there. Lots of trading opportunities. You just have to be careful, have stops, and get out, and just don't get too greedy. And at the same time, you know, don't keep your losses for too long, because the longer you keep your losses, the bigger the anxiety and misery is going to be. I say it all the time. Let me say it again. If something declines by 50%, for it to break even, it has to go up by 100%. And 100% moves sometimes don't really happen very often. So you have to be careful on what you're buying. What's my favorite trade right now? I will get back to you on that. I will talk about it in detail if I can. What do you think about Warren Buffett pulling out stake from Delta, bankruptcy, or rebuy at lower price? I was actually having a discussion with somebody, and Warren Buffett is one of those people who can actually buy up the whole industry. The amount of cash not buy up the whole industry, but provide a lot of liquidity to airlines. Airlines right now, and that was another question that I got about airlines. Airlines right now are in a very bad shape. The global economy or the global travel industry has actually slowed down significantly. To get some idea, just Google air traffic, and you'll see the amount of planes that are not in the air. And just go around the major hubs around the global economy, like New York, Shanghai, Dubai, or not even Dubai, like Toronto, Chicago, LA, Sydney, places like that, and you'll see the amount of traffic has slowed down significantly. The amount of planes that are in the air is much lower than what it was a month ago or 2 months ago. So, airline industry has been in a very bad shape. They are going to need a bailout. That's what I think, at least, and I think why I have a feeling why Warren Buffett pulled out. Again, speculation, my opinion. I could be totally wrong on this. If I was in Warren Buffett's place, I wouldn't be surprised if we see an event where the investors. I'm not talking about the debt owners of of airlines. I'm talking investors of those airlines. They get hurt. So maybe. They are starting to, maybe he's starting to pull back a little bit and just be like, okay, I'm going to wait and see how they play out and enter maybe later. Airlines right now, in my opinion, they are trading at bankrupt values. They are definitely worth looking. Am I buying? I don't think so right now, because, like I said, the outlook is very foggy. Will people start traveling as soon as this is over? Um, so we'll see how that goes. I see another comment. We are entering deep value territory from predicting alpha. Um, I think so, but let's see. Let me comment a little bit on my value and like what is happening in the bear. So the this morning I wrote about how a bear market operates, and someone reached out and like, hey, can you talk about it in the detail, like what is happening and how what should we expect? So right now, I am convinced that we're in a bear market. Bear market is when there are more sellers than there are buyers. Or in technical term, bear market is when the stock market has, or the asset has declined 20% or more from the recent highs. Um, I was there in 2009, 2008, 2009, and I was trading the market. I was working for a trading firm down in Toronto, and I worked as a prop trader, and I remember exactly how things worked out, and it was uh, and at that time, whoever you talked to, they talked about the similar thing. Understand that bear market has three phases. The first phase is the rapid selling that happens. Sorry, let me repeat myself. Three phases. First phase is rapid selling. We had that. We had that in March. The second phase is usually called the suckers rally, dead cat bounce, bull trap. There's so many different names for it, but initially the idea behind it is that it gives you a feeling that everything is okay. You should start buying. Um, the suckers rally, the dead cat bounce, or the bull trap happens when people try to cover their short positions, or people who thought that there is value, they start to jump in and they start buying. The Then after the suckers rally, the second part comes in, and this is the final selling point. This is the final selling leg, I guess you can call it that too. This is when you take out the lows that were made previously. So in on March 20th, we made new lows. We made some lows on indices. The next leg should, or that's how in a typical bear market, you will see those lows taken out, and that's when you start to go out and look for value, and that's the time to like actually start going and hunting, like pretty much, because there will be time where people will for sell anything and everything in sight, and that's usually when you go and buy up everything. Will it happen this time around, and we won't and we won't see anything like a typical bear market? I don't know. I'm watching out. I don't like the things that are happening, so I have a feeling we see another leg down before we see another move up. When will we see that another like the next leg down? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, and anybody can price it, but I have a feeling we see it. When, again, I can't time it. Um, Give me 1 second. Let me just cut off all the things that I've already talked about. I've talked about dollar collapse, guys like Robert Kiyosaki. I've talked about shortage, Canadian banks, debt to GDP. How does a bear market work? Um, all right, so let me read a question here before I go to the ones that I've written. What do you think will happen with all these small businesses closing out? We don't have income. Yeah, this is where I go, okay, um, what kind of collapses, what kind of default rates they're going to be after we get out of this? And I don't think anyone is asking that question. How many small businesses are actually going to go out of business? There are a lot of small businesses that actually work on cash flow basis. They're not really making money. initially? Are they? What's going to happen to them? What are they going to default on the loans, or a lot of companies have already maxed out their credit lines, and what happens next, right? And then I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and he runs a small business with about 8 to 10 employees, and he said, like, I'm out of my options to continue. I mean, he had to actually put, I think, 5 out of, like, the major part of his workforce to EI, because he says, now I'm working, now I'm working like much more than I used to, and I have to lay off employees because I can't continue on with employees. So, and he has maxed out his credit line. So it's just like, it's a very rough situation for a small business, and that's where I go. What happens to small businesses? And this is, nobody is really talking about it. I know in the news we hear all about, like, oh, we're gonna give small businesses some help, or some stimulus, or whatever it is. How much can you actually do when you don't really know the number? And this is where you have to be like a little cynical about, okay, like, in the U.S., for example, they're talking $300 billion to small businesses. When will they get the money? How will they get the money? What is the, like, and what is the, like, is government gonna take a stake in your business when they give you the money? So it's just like a lot of questions um, that are not being asked, in my opinion. Here's the one: 3-year mortality rate, for that is very true. Uh, and what happens to if we don't open another 2 months? The number of small business, I am concerned about a lot of small businesses. Like, I'm just thinking barber. Like, okay, so the barber I go to, they have one, two, three, four, five. So about eight barbers working in the same shop. For the past month and a half, these guys are not working. Um, they have rent. I know they rent because I asked. It's not owned by them, but they rent the space. The rent, they have to pay the rent. Um, so assuming the rent is $5,000, but they're not making any money coming in, so they're minus $5,000 a month. Plus, I'm assuming they have to pay property taxes, insurance, and a bunch of other things. So, how are they going to survive down the road? But that's just not small business. You have to also wonder what's going to happen to the landlord who actually leases the place out. So the landlord is missing out on rent. So will landlord, and when landlord misses out on the rent, he may or she may have issues paying the mortgage. So you see, like, the problem is, the longer this goes on, the bigger the troubles are going to be, and the stimulus may not be enough. Like, how much are you going to give to small businesses? We don't know the exact number, and that's where I am a little skeptical on what will happen. Um, I will come back to oil prices later. Let me go back to the question about bonds. Someone reached out and they said, bonds, the yields are looking good between the high yields and the investment grade, and what's happening with fallen angels. Fallen angels. So think of it as, I'm trying to explain it in the most simplest term possible. Fallen angels are companies that had investment grade ratings, but now, because of this crisis, they have come down on their credit ratings. For example, Delta actually was a investment grade rating. They came down in their ratings, and now they're, if I'm not mistaken, they're considered a junk bond. Junk bond meaning they have a high yield and high risk of default. So the person, I believe, they asked is it good time to buy those, or to look into that kind of debt, or like what should you do when it comes to, like, fixed income or investing in bonds? Um, I think right now the Fed is actually is looking into, if I'm not mistaken, they're actually buying corporate bonds, and that gives me some sort of a reason to believe that you might be okay in the near term to just own few corporate bonds and just buy some ETF that owns corporate bond, and you might be fine. But in the long term, I would be a little skeptical here when it comes to high yield bonds. So over between 2018 and 2019, a lot of high yield bonds were issued because the interest rates were low, and high yield bonds were offering very high yields, so people rushed to them. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of those bonds actually go default, and it'll just be interesting how it plays out. Again, I don't have the number, but what I don't have the exact numbers, but what I was able to research is that within last month or so, about $90 billion worth of investment grade bonds came down to junk bonds, or they call the fallen angels. So that's a big number. People who own those bonds are probably scared at the moment. So let's see how that plays out. So will be interesting. Um, how do bonds work exactly? I will get back to you on that, and I'll share some links on that. Remind me or DM me right now so I can tell you how bonds market work. Um, Now that done. All right, here's a oil question. What do you think about oil? Um, will we ever go back to 60? So prior to this, if you've been following me for a while, you would know that I've been saying that there's a lot of supply out there, but the demand had been declining, and then and that's not going to work out for the price. Um, and what ended up happening just before this crisis actually started to go on, just before the crisis, the coronavirus pandemic started to begin, Saudi Arabia came in and they tried to get a market share from Russians in Europe, and they started to lower their price, and that really triggered the price of oil lower. What they did is they said we're gonna produce more oil, and we're going to lower the price of oil we send to European countries. If I'm not correct, you can correct me later or message me, and then we'll go from there. So that was the whole thing that really brought the price of oil down. A lot of supply, a pandemic that's shutting down everything in the world. So you already had a lot of supply, and now no more demand, pretty much. Like not zero demand, but significantly low demand, and that really beat the oil prices to the ground. Will we ever see 60? I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, we will see 60. Like, it's going to happen. It's just not going to happen anytime soon. But I think at 20, oil is very attractive. At 18, oil is super attractive. If it goes to 10, uh, it's going to be even better. So oil is getting interesting, and you have to also realize that at $20 oil, nobody is really profitable. There's that number going around like, oh, Saudi Arabia can produce it for $14, or they can produce it for $10, or Russia can produce it for whatever price. Yeah, they can produce it for that low, but for Saudi Arabia especially, their government runs on oil revenue, and oil revenue means that like they need higher oil price. If my calculation is that Saudi Arabia actually needs around $50 to $70 oil rather than a $20 oil, and my theory has been so nobody really is making money, and the longer the oil price remains low, the bigger the shortages are going to be down the road, and that's when you get a spike in prices. I personally think we get to 40 to 45 by next summer, if things improve and we continue to see Um, if things improve and at the same time, there is a production cut by Saudi Arabia and Russia. Also, the conspiracy theory that I've been talking about, I'm not sure if it's a conspiracy theory, and again, this might be a crazy idea. I just feel like the move that happened, the what Saudi Arabia did, and what the Saudi Arabia and the Russia feud that came up was kind of like a plot to take down the U.S. and Canadian oil, because it was the U.S. and Canadian oil that was hurt the most, in my opinion, because these guys are their break even cost is around like 50, 60. So it's just like they brought it down, and now OPEC is asking US to be on the negotiation table. So that's just interesting. Again, conspiracy theory stuff. You shouldn't listen to me on that, but that's what I'm thinking. Could I be wrong? 100%. I hope I am wrong, and I hope this was just this was just like the yeah, I don't know. I'll just stop on that because too many things I can talk around there. That was the oil prices outlook. What happens to Canadian oil? Canadian oil is in a very, 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 very bad shape. While the WTI crude is trading at 24, the the Canadian oil is trading at what, $8. I don't know any company that can produce profitably or even create some cash flow at $8. So I expect, if oil prices do not change, I expect a lot of Canadian oil companies to come under fire. I personally wouldn't be surprised if the government steps in and bails out a couple of oil companies to actually continue to do business, because Western Canada is very heavy on oil, and they're struggling. They're struggling with COVID, and they're struggling with oil prices. So that's going to be a big thing for Western Canada. So let's see how that works out. With that out of the way, my take on Canadian housing market. Um, Canada had a solid run prior to the prior to this crisis, in housing market. Even like I'm looking from my house perspective. I bought in 2015, and end of 2019, if on paper, my home value had gone up about 100%, and that was a rapid acceleration in my opinion. This year, I wouldn't be surprised if we step back a little bit. 10 to 15% decline in Canadian housing market is a real possibility. So let's see how that goes. Given the unemployment soaring in Canada, and for those people who argue that Canada gets a lot of immigrants every year, and the immigrants come in and they buy all the houses. So the Canadian immigration has kind of closed down, and I don't think they're starting anytime soon. So all the hopes that the immigrants will come in and buy the houses, I don't think that's happening in summer this year. But for those of you who are looking to buy, I would go right now and start looking, get pre-approved. If you need help with mortgage brokers, if you need help with real estate agents, reach out. I can connect you with a few of the best ones I know, and they'll help you out. They will, it's just, if you're looking for, this is going to be the point for you to buy, in my opinion. If you're looking to buy, next year you won't see the prices like this. You will not see prices this low. We're going to see something stellar, or something astronomical move in housing market. That's what I think, because real assets are going to have a lot of value, and they're going to be worth a lot more than they are worth right now. So yeah, that's my take on Canadian housing market. When it comes to interest rates, interest rates are, I'm on the camp that says interest rates are going to go negative. We're not there yet, but they might because things are so bad. It just things are bad, so it's just going to be central banks will have to do a lot more. Bank of Canada, I think they didn't lower their rates enough, so they'll have to do that. Um, Federal Reserve is printing a lot of money. Um, I think they may have to lower rates further. Banks are not really lending right now. When will they start lending? I don't know, but it's something to keep in mind, like something to look around and it's just like something to research on your own as well. Interest rates are very important, and I think we're going to see what happens when it'll just be very interesting on how this all plays out. And you also have to keep in mind there are a lot of derivatives out there that are based on interest rates. Um, Beginning of the year, there was nobody, and I have checked, there was nobody who said that there was only two or well, three people. I was one of them. I was saying that we're gonna see negative rates, and Federal Reserve may start printing again like there's no tomorrow. Everyone I talked to at the big banks, there wasn't anybody who said interest rates would go low and Federal Reserve would start printing money. So I have a very strong feeling a lot of people who have these derivatives, there like a lot of these derivatives could be impacted given what has happened over the past 2 months. So it'll be something to look out for. The derivative market is actually very opaque. You can't really see it clearly. So you learn it on quarterly basis, or at least I learn it on quarterly basis when there is an OCC. You can Google it. OCC derivative reports come out on at the end, for the quarter. So you learn it. You learn a bit about it from there and how the banks are reacting and what kind of collateral they have and things like that. So that will be really interesting to see how that plays out, because if we just look at the US, the top 25 US banks have about, I think it's like 123 to or about 130 trillion notional value of interest rate derivatives. So that's a big amount, and derivatives um, can go bad very quickly. So again, will be interesting to see how that plays out. I see a question that says interest rates increasing. Why? Banks trying to protect themselves. If I'm not mistaken, um, interest rates are increasing because in the bonds market, what's happening is people are earlier I was talking about the dollar shortage and what's happening is people are actually selling their position, liquidating their position, and what that does is you're seeing a selling in in the bonds market that is creating the yields to spike higher and people needing cash. There is a shortage of cash. It sounds crazy when I talk about it. People need cash in times like these. There are a lot of redemption calls happening where people are saying, "Hey, I want my money back." So losses in investments. So